Good morning, everybody. The March 12, 2021 School Land Board meeting will now come to order. We're entering into this meeting pursuant to the governor's executive order to avoid gatherings of more than 10 and pursuant to the suspension of certain provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act. The March 12, 21 meeting of the School Land Board meeting is held today by Zoom as authorized under the Government Code Section 551 Tech 125. Access to the meeting by members of the public was published in advance in the Texas Register in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. Any member of the public who wishes to address the board on a matter within our authority should indicate so at the beginning of the meeting in the chat to the extent you can. I will limit the length of time available to each individual to the extent someone's going to chime in on today's meeting. I don't believe we have any visitors on the line right now wishing to speak. But should you, during the course of the meeting, feel free to enter in a text on the chat and we'll make sure that we get you online. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our last meeting on January 19th. Mr. Burciago was not in attendance in the meeting. So the four of us, in assuming no questions or comments regarding those minutes, could entertain a motion to confirm those minutes for the record.
I'll move, Todd.
Second, Michael.
Motion is made and seconded and carries with one abstention to approve the minutes. Next item on the agenda is number 2, our consent agenda. Similarly, if members of the board have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding the consent agenda as posted, please feel free to share those. But assuming there are none, I could entertain a motion to confirm the consent agenda.
So move, Todd.
Second, Michael.
Motion is made, seconded, and carries unanimously to approve the consent agenda as posted. Next item on the agenda, we are delighted to welcome Commissioner Morath of TEA to give us an annual presentation. I believe a web link has been provided for all the board members to follow along. We're really thrilled to continue this collaboration, Commissioner, and anxiously awaiting your presentation and your words of advice.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Bush. Thank you, all members, for inviting me here today to kind of give you a really broad update on public education in the state of Texas. I think you were given a link in advance to our annual report. This is a practice that we started about 4 years ago in the agency to try to synthesize at a high level what we know about public education, the good and the bad, as it were, and the sort of direction that we're headed. Do I have the ability to share my screen, Corey, while we're doing this? Do you know?
I believe you should. I believe you do. If you'll go ahead and give it a try.
Okay, I'm gonna give it a try. So hopefully you see a middle-aged student with a mask on. This is what school has looked like in Texas this year. So for a lot of kids all over the state, although it is changing as the conditions of the virus have gotten better around the state. I thought the easiest thing to do was to just kind of walk through this document, as it were, because I think the document provides a decent high-level overview of where we are educationally. But before I get into the document in detail, I will just, I think it's useful to reflect on the last 12 months for all of us, but certainly our educators, our students have been unlike any of us had ever planned for, and been some of the most challenging for our educators and for our kids and our families that we've ever had to face. There has been a massive adjustment in public education in the last year, with huge numbers of people choosing for health reasons to receive remote instruction. And at present, just to kind of give you the latest statistics that we have gathered, 56% of kids in Texas are being taught in a classroom, and 44% of the roughly 5.5 million kids that are enrolled in Texas public schools are still being educated remotely, even today, as we speak. So all kids have access to in-person instruction. We've modified our school finance rules so that your school districts are fully funded equally for on-campus and remote instruction. But we set it up so that parents really have the choice as to what they wish. So a slight majority of parents are choosing in-person instruction. and a slight minority of parents are choosing remote instruction as of today. The data that we have coming into the year, you'll see in this bar chart on the left. This really provides kind of a high, the entire waterfront as it stands of public education in Texas, from kindergarten readiness. So when you think 5-year-olds entering the system, are they ready for basic lessons in literacy, basic lessons in numeracy? And what you see from the data is year over year we improved, and this is data from fall of 2019. But still only about half of 5-year-olds when they start kindergarten are ready for basic lessons in literacy and numeracy, which is a significant challenge in terms of what our educators then do to support those kids over time. At the end of 3rd grade, we have a benchmark kind of to find out what our students know, what can they do as a 3rd grader. And just to put some meat on those bones, we expect, for example, and the State Board of Education adopts these curricular expectations for kids. We expect that every 3rd grader should have memorized their times tables. That's one of the standards of our system. And so we have a STAR test every year that that measures where our kids are, that provides that information to parents, provides that information to educators. What we see is that about half of our 3rd graders, actually a little under half of our 3rd graders, are reading and doing math at grade level. Fast forward 5 years to the end of 8th grade, and we see improvement. The longer we have our kids, the better we support them. But still, only slightly more than half of our 8th graders are meeting grade level in reading and math. The next 2 bars are also worth talking about, but I'm going to skip the low bar for a second and talk about the high one. 90% of kids in Texas graduate on time in 4 years. It's probably in the top 5 of all states in terms of graduation rates. It represents a 30-year high, a trend of improvement in Texas, which is great news. But just because you graduated with a high school diploma doesn't mean that you're truly ready for what life is going to throw at you next. And so what you see is only about half of those students go on to enter a post-secondary institution. So think community college, trade school, or a university. And 6 years after high school graduation, so we're talking 24-year-olds, the kids who graduated from a Texas public school, what percentage of those kids obtained a trade credential? You think maybe a kind of 1-year trade credential, welding certification, something like that. An associate's degree, which is typically a 2-year experience, or a bachelor's degree, typically 4-year experience. So the number is only about a little under a third of our kids 6 years after high school have obtained some kind of post-secondary credential. And our goal for the state, as espoused by the coordinating board, adopted by the governor, and really formalized by the legislature, is we know just where the economy is. We know the fabric of our republic, that we really want 60% of our young people to have possessed some kind of post-secondary credential. We think that's what's necessary to keep our economy humming. We think that's what's necessary in a democracy. So we have a long way to go towards our goal. And that takes me back to the sort of low bar there. Even though 90% of our kids are graduating, only 18% of our kids, when they graduate, have obtained a SAT or ACT score that's high enough that would indicate that they are ready for success in college. And that's why you see the sort of college persistence numbers so much lower than the high school graduation numbers. The big question marks that you see there is because we don't know how we landed at the end of last year. Schools got shut down basically in March. And we don't have particularly keen insight on how well our kids continue to grow educationally. What I will say is that we as an organization provided our schools an optional beginning of year assessment. This would have been, think about September or October. So at the end of the beginning of the COVID crisis, but still very much not at the end of the COVID crisis. About 750,000 kids participated in that assessment, and we were able to use sort of research and statistical techniques to try to extrapolate that out to what it really means. And what it showed is that the average kid in Texas started this school year roughly 3.2 months behind where they normally start. So the data that we have from COVID is sobering, is a sort of short version. We are at TEA and as a system of public education, we try to be as strategic as possible in the work that we do. And we have settled on a set of priorities after much consultation with educators, parents, students themselves all over the state of Texas, 4 key priorities to try to drive positive change. It starts with the teacher in the classroom. We know that teachers are the single most important in-school factor that affects student outcomes. And the work that we do to wrap our arms around our teachers, to love on those who love on our kids, this is probably the most important work that we can do. And so we have a whole set of work related to improving our ability to recruit, support, and retain teachers and principals. We also think about those 5-year-olds, our youngest learners. We know that you have to establish a strong foundation in reading and math for them to really succeed in their educational career and really in their lives. And so the work that we do to shift attention and resources and ensure that we are establishing a strong foundation in reading and math. This is another key strategic lever for us as an organization, for us as a system of public education, because it's fundamentally much easier to prevent the achievement gap from getting created in the first place than it is to try to remediate it after it exists. There are still kids on the other end of the spectrum, from an age perspective, high schoolers that they are fixing to be launched into the rigors of life. And we want to ensure that the high school experience is relevant for them for what they're going to do after high school, but also rigorous. And so there's a lot of re-engineering work that's happening at the high school level. And we're supporting that with our 3rd key priority. Our 4th priority, what do we do when our promise of public education that as the great equalizer, when we have not lived up to that promise, when the schools that our kids attend are not meeting their needs. And so we do have a whole set of activities where we really try to wrap our arms around our most struggling campuses to provide the kinds of support that we need so that we can change the trajectory of both the students and the adults on that campus to really ensure that our moral commitment to children is being met. These are our 4 key priorities, and they really rest on some foundational pillars, including just transparent information on, do we know where our kids are? We have an update on our first key priority here. What are we doing to support the teaching profession? House Bill 3 was passed by the legislature last session. You may have some familiarity with it. One of the components that it did was it put teachers on the path to make 6-figure salaries in Texas through something called the teacher incentive allotment. And so the journey will be long for us as a state, but it has started in earnest. And so a group of master teachers received on average a $22,000 pay increase from the year before to last year. This is a very significant step in the right direction for our teachers, and it's been built with an equity mindset. We're also training all elementary teachers in the state of Texas on the science of teaching reading, the evidence-based literacy practices. So the reading academies that actually were initiated under Governor George W. Bush roughly a generation ago are back and being executed at a scale that has been unprecedented in the state of Texas, a full 1-year fellowship for all of our elementary school literacy teachers to support them in the teaching of literacy to our kids. There's also a provision in House Bill 3 that allows elementary schools to add up to 30 days to the school calendar to give kids more time. And I will say that COVID has significantly increased the interest in that as a support that kids will need. Our connecting high school to college and career, there's just a kind of an update on the statistics. We've seen improvement year over year in the level of college readiness. Now, I will say this is all pre-COVID. These numbers are from the high school graduating class of 2019, which is the year before COVID hit. But you can see generally how kids are demonstrating college readiness or career readiness or military readiness. And you also see a set of initiatives that we're doing to really support our most struggling campuses, our Texas instructional leadership work that we do in partnership with our service centers. That work has resulted in campuses that are supported seeing more than double the rate of A and B campuses, which were formerly D and F. So very significant rapid improvement for campuses when we can support them holistically. Special education, you may be familiar with some news struggles where the state has had some challenges in special education. What we show here is that over the last 4 years, there's been a massive improvement in our ability to provide special education supports to kids. When we used to not identify students that really were eligible and in need of special education supports at the level that we should have been, you can see that over the last 3 years, we've added roughly 120,000 kids to receive special education services. We've actually added more kids into our special education service area as a state than half the kids have total kids in special education. So very significant improvement in identifying students eligible for support. What we have not yet done is ensure that those students are receiving the academic supports that they need to reach grade level, which the vast majority of them are perfectly capable of doing them with appropriate supports. Of particular interest, I think, to the GLO and the school land board is the impact that the Permanent School Fund has on public education. And I'm going to actually switch gears for a second. You can see in the most recent annual report, we have been significantly increasing funds in the state of Texas for public education. And we've gone from in 2011, or 2012, the weighted all-in funding per kid was about $10,000 in Texas. It is now, it was over $12,000, and that was the year before House Bill 3 started. House Bill 3 has brought that up closer to $13,000 per student. So very significant increases in per pupil funding over the last several years in Texas. And when you talk about per pupil funding, those numbers end up being very big because we had a lot of pupils. We had 5.5 million kids in our school system. So I'm going to share with you a slightly different visual. Let me escape from this and pull up one more document. Bear with me just a second. This is a page from our annual report, I think a year or two ago. Which I thought y'all as a group would have a particular interest in, and it's the right side of this chart. So you can see this, this is slightly older data. This is fiscal year 2017. But what we did was we broke down the major buckets of funding that were federal, that were local, and that were state. And that big bag of money there was at the time the size of the Permanent School Fund, $41.4 billion. It's actually larger than that, thanks to y'all's fantastic stewardship of the fund, and of course the SBOE's work through our employees here at the agency, and what that money goes into. It goes into the available school fund to provide direct funding to public schools for their general operations, and it goes into the instructional materials allotment to buy textbooks, to buy actually Chromebooks, because the instructional materials allotment allows you to buy technology, to buy digital learning tools. So the Permanent School Fund as a feature of Texas public education is very unique in public education globally. This is effectively an endowment for public education. It's the largest education endowment on earth. It's bigger than any higher education endowment. And it provides money to run schools tax-free. And there's not another state in the country, and I'm actually unaware of even sovereign wealth funds around the globe that have this sheer volume of wealth that is invested and managed to the benefit of both current and future generations of school children. It's really an amazing feature of public education. So I thought, even though this wasn't in this year's annual report, I thought y'all as a group would be interested in this particular visual. Feel free to read our old annual reports. They are page-turning, informative resources for sure. Actually, I joke with my own team that every time we draft one of these things, I make my wife read it cover to cover. That way I know at least one Texan has read the whole thing. But let me get back to this year's annual report. COVID is, of course, a major disruption this year. This a couple of pages in the annual report highlight a lot of the COVID intervention work that we have done to date. We've used, thanks to both federal and state appropriators, we've invested $2.2 billion of federal funds new to public education in the last 12 months. And that was before Congress passed some extraordinarily large appropriations. So there's $17 billion more coming to Texas public education from the feds. But in our work to date, we have acquired over 3.2 million learning devices. Basically, every single kid in Texas in public schools should have access to an iPad, Chromebook, or a laptop that they can work from at home, really anywhere. We have completely closed the digital divide with regard to devices in 1 year in Texas, which is pretty extraordinary. Now that just because you have, say, a laptop, Chromebook, or iPad doesn't mean you have internet. We made a major dent in internet access. I think over 1 million hotspots actually have been deployed. And we're now working on phase 2 of this work to ensure that kids have high-speed broadband in a reliable fashion, say fixed line internet or otherwise, and that's available on a sustainable basis. And we're currently working with the legislature on ensuring that that is deployed. And then we will close both sides of the digital divide, the device and the internet, and probably be the first state to do that. We've also provided our educators all over the state of Texas with really best-in-class remote learning resources. We as a system didn't have a whole lot of experience with remote instruction. So we went all in and provided a level playing field so that every school system had free, very rigorous, high quality instructional materials from a remote learning perspective. And you can see highlighted some of those materials on this page. And then last but not least, again, we try to show the unvarnished truth of public education, and looking only at Texas as a state doesn't give you a sense of how we stack up around the country. And so this the left-hand slide is the most recent slice of results from the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which shows exactly where our kids stack up to the competition around the country. And while there are definitely bright spots in Texas, for example, African-American fourth graders in Texas are literally the highest performing African-American students in math in the country. There are also a lot of causes for concern, and reading has actually been on a somewhat steady decline for a number of years. Thankfully, the results, the impact of House Bill 3 and the work of our strategic plan, we have every reason to believe that this will be turning around in a pretty significant way. But of course, change at the scale of Texas is daunting. So it'll take some time to see the fruits of that labor manifest. And what I would say is, I was feeling very optimistic about all that before March 12th of last year, which is really when the COVID disruption began. And I'm deeply concerned about what COVID will mean for us for a generation. And to leave you with just some final thoughts on that, there are studies of major disruptions to public education that have been conducted around the globe. TEA did a study of kids impacted by Hurricane Katrina that came to Texas after the hurricane. What we found was after 4 years of intense intervention, the kids caught up to state average in reading, but they never caught up in math. And we basically have had a much bigger hurricane than Katrina. Another sobering study, Argentina experienced a teacher strike for about 88 days in the 1980s. When the schools came back, there was no systemic adjustment. They came back, kids picked up where they left off. There was no major change in practice. Researchers and economists have studied that 3-month shutdown in Argentina. The kids that were affected by that shutdown had vastly lower academic outcomes for the remainder of their academic career. They graduated from high school at lower rates. They went to college at lower rates. They graduated from college at lower rates. They also had vastly lower wage levels for the remainder of their natural lives. Economists have found a 20-year impact on the GDP of Argentina from a 3-month teacher strike that depressed the GDP growth of Argentina. So we can't be Argentina. We will have to make very significant adjustments to the way that our education system works to figure out how we can improve the ability to accelerate students, to get them more than a year's worth of academic knowledge in a year's worth of time. And our system, our educators have worked mightily for years. The journey of Texas public education is a journey of continuous improvement. We've made major gains for 30 years, but the gains are not happening for all kids equally. And the divide between the haves and the have-nots actually just seems to be continuing to widen. Everyone is getting better, but middle class and upper income kids are getting better faster than lower income kids. And 60% of the kids in the state of Texas are eligible for a free or reduced lunch. So we've got a lot of work in front of us, and failure is not an option. It's a moral obligation to our kids, and it's an economic necessity for our republic. So anyways, thank you for your willingness to entertain you with our annual report and give you a high level overview. I'm happy to take questions on anything you got.
Thank you, Commissioner. Incredible presentation, and really appreciate your leadership during these turbulent times. If the board has any questions at this time, Commissioner is here to address them. But let me be the first to say that we really appreciate your candor in terms of the challenges in front of us. I think more importantly for the board and for the GLO, this is an incredible contextual reminder of why we do this work and who our ultimate beneficiary is. And so I'm not sure, it's been a while since a TEA commissioner has presented to us, but I'm glad you have, and I look forward to this being a newfound tradition with the school land board.
Absolutely honored to be here.
Any questions from the board? I had one question before we dismiss you on college persistence. I'm just curious, what is the largest challenge? Is it financial or affordability for a lot of the K through 12 grads that are coming out into post-secondary education in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's myriad factors. So one is, if we're honest with ourselves, one is not insufficient rigor preparation for high school graduates for many of the kids who enter college. For a lot of kids, if they have not come out of a high school where they've written, say, a 8 to 20 page term paper while they were in high school, or they've not had to read huge volumes of reading material while they were in high school, college is a rude comeuppance for a lot of those kids, and as a result, it causes a great deal of struggle. So one thing that we have to do is we certainly have to significantly up our game in terms of the level of rigor that happens in K-12. Another thing that is true is exactly what you mentioned. It's the financial challenges that students face, and I would say that the background of the student has a big difference as to how they can weather the storm. So for some students, your car breaks down, not a big deal. You figure out how to fix the car, and you keep after your college trajectory. For other students, the car breaks down. That's the end of college, because just again, you got to make money to feed yourself. You got to make money to pay tuition. You don't have any money saved up because of the financial background that you're walking into. We got a lot of first generation college kids coming in, and so it's not just the tuition and fees that are a barrier. It's sort of the other ebbs and flows that life can throw at you that become financial barriers. And then I'd say another significant barrier is the ability to navigate the transition from high school, where many of your educational decisions were made for you by adults, to college, which is where you're making all the decisions. It's somewhat difficult to navigate that experience for many kids. And I wasn't, I've reflected on my own journey to college. My mom never went to college, but my dad did. And I had a brother and sister that had gone. So I had the benefit of people whose shoulder I could lean on and say, like, I got to figure out, is this class the right class to take? How many hours do I really need to graduate? Is this aligned to my program of study? Is this going to get me out? Is this going to be useful? And so the support structures, which we kind of think of as the advising system, that exists not just in higher education, but seamlessly connected between higher education and K-12 is also a significant barrier. So I'd say those are probably your big three: sort of academic rigor, sort of financial challenges with regard to tuition and fees and sort of life, and then advising to make sure that that you can properly take ownership of your future and do so while getting good advice along the way.
Thank you for that. On a side matter, would like to follow up on the state energy marketing program, because from the winter storm, a few of our ISD partners were affected by the storm, and would love to follow up with you in terms of coordinating some of the federal monies that will be arriving to Texas. And once again, want to thank you for your leadership. And if you have to sign off, go ahead and do that. We really appreciate your presentation. Look forward to being a partner to you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you, board members, for your time, and thanks for all of you for your service.
Thank you.
This is a non-voting item, meaning we can jump to next item on the agenda, which is number 4. I believe Becky was to present.
Good morning, commissioners and members of the board. For the record, my name is Becky Petty from Office of General Counsel. With me are Amy Nunez from Field Ops and Steve Rodriguez from Coastal Leasing. Agenda item number 4 is for proposed amendments to rules in chapter 155, sections 155.1, .3, and .15. To briefly summarize, the proposed rule changes focus on adding a new definition to the chapter for living shorelines, streamlining the administration of easements for living shorelines, and proposing new rates and fees for commercial easements to reflect inflation and to come into line with the rates charged by other Gulf states. In a little more detail, the amendment to section 155.1 adds a definition of living shorelines to update the code so that it will be consistent with terminology commonly used by other federal and state programs. Specifically, a living shoreline is defined as an alternative to traditional shoreline stabilization techniques and has substantial nature-based features, which are sometimes combined with hard structural components such as breakwaters to protect the shoreline while maintaining ecosystem functions. There are also changes to section 155.3E, which is the section that lists non-commercial activities for which the commissioner may approve an easement application without board approval. So that proposed amendment would add easements for living shorelines, so long as they are less than 500 feet long, to the type of instrument the commissioner may authorize without board approval. This will streamline the leasing process and save staff time. Also, due to their benefits to the environment, living shorelines are consistent with the type of activity the commissioner authorizes already without board approval. There are also several changes to section 155.15. That section includes proposed amendments to the fee tables that add living shorelines as a structure with no annual rent that is included under the current easement category that includes riprap and vegetative cover. Also proposed are the addition of a footnote to the breakwater fee category to indicate that breakwaters associated with living shorelines don't have any annual rent. These amendments reflect current practice since living shorelines and associated breakwaters are not charged rent due to their benefits to the environment. Finally, the other proposed amendments to section 155.15 increase rent and fees for commercial easements and leases. The proposed amendments to fee table 4, which is for commercial and industrial activity, would revise rent and fees for commercial coastal easements in order to account for inflation since 1995, which was the last time rent and fees for this type of easement were modified. These changes bring rates in line with current market rates for other Gulf Coast states. Many of these states adjust annually for inflation and charge additional fees on top of their base rates. Texas currently has one of the lowest rental rates for commercial and industrial leases on state-owned submerged lands. In addition, the amendments adjust annual minimum rent for commercial and industrial activity from $100 to $500 a year. Also, under the amendment, fees for existing projects remain on the same 20% increase every 5 years schedule. But if a project is modified outside of its current footprint, the new rate change would take effect. So that summarizes the changes. And if there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, staff respectfully requests that the board authorize publication of the proposed rules in the next issue of the Texas Register.
Any questions from the board at this time? My only question was just on commercial easements and leases, rent and fee increase on section 155, Tech 15, B1C, Romanet 4. When we're saying we're updating since 95, we're not going to retroactively apply based upon inflation from that time, correct? Or how does that work in terms of a new lessee that we're signing up right now? They're not paying back to a schedule based on 95, right?
That's my understanding, though I was relying on Steve Rodriguez to answer that question since that is his field of expertise. Is he on here? He told me he was going to be on. Maybe he's just not a panelist.
I saw him a few moments ago, but I no longer see him in the attendees list. Oh, and he says he's here. Let me see.
I'm assuming it just means any new lease basically, is going to be based upon the updated fee schedule.
Yeah, this is Russell May with Asset Management. Yeah, you're correct, Commissioner. It's we're going to implement it on new leases. It will not be retroactive for existing leases. So it'll be applied to a brand new lease going forward only, if that answers that.
Steve has been promoted, so he's joined the meeting as well.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. Yeah, just like Russell said, that nothing's really going to change for previous customers. This is only going to affect new projects, and not even renewals will it affect. So yeah, nothing is going to be proactive or retroactively charged.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Could entertain a motion to confirm these changes to Title 31 Texas Administrative Code Chapter 155.
I'll move, Commissioner. This is Todd.
Second, Michael.
Motion is made, seconded, and carries unanimously to approve item number 4. Thank you, team. Next item is number 5.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, board members. This is Allison Chinsaski from the Office of General Counsel. The item is to discuss 2 different categories of changes that the staff is recommending to the Permanent School Fund Code of Ethics. In your agenda packet, there was a memo and a red line copy of the Code of Ethics if you want to take a look at that. The current version of the Code of Ethics was adopted in May of 2017. Since that time, there have been some staffing and organizational changes. I'm the ethics attorney / officer. So a decision was made to move compliance functions to the Office of General Counsel, along with moving the compliance officer. As a result of those changes, there is no longer a standalone Office of Compliance. So therefore, staff is recommending that the wording in the code that states Office of Compliance, which would be found on pages 6, 7, 8, 11, and 13, be changed to the words ethics officer to reflect the current functions and organizational structure. In addition to those recommended changes, we no longer use a third-party reporting system to report fraud that's listed on pages 11 and 12 of the code. There's still a option to report any fraud to the state auditor's office, but we now have an online reporting system as well as a dedicated phone number for making those reports. Therefore, staff is recommending that information be updated to reflect the current reporting system. And pursuant to statute, both of these changes were submitted to the Texas Ethics Commission and the State Auditor's Office for their review, and neither office had any revisions or comments to these changes. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the board at this time? Hearing none, I could entertain a motion to approve the proposed revisions.
This is Michael. So moved.
Second, Todd.
Motion is made, seconded, and carries unanimously to approve item number 5.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Items 6 through 8 will be held in executive session. We'll enter into it pursuant to Chapter 551, Subchapter D, Section 551, Tech 071, the Government Code, for discussion and consideration regarding pending or contemplated litigation and or settlement offers, or to seek or receive attorney advice or counsel related to items 6 through 8 on the docket. We'll also enter into it subject to subsection 551 Tech 072 for discussion consideration concerning purchase, sale, exchange, lease, or value of real property related to items 6 through 8 on the docket. Following executive session, we'll reconvene an open session. The open session of the March 12, 2021 School Land Board meeting will now resume with item number 6.
Good morning, Amber Long, Asset Management. Staff recommends approval of the disposition of excess land for the terms discussed in closed session. Any questions?
Any questions from the board at this time?
This is Michael. I move to approve.
Second, Todd.
Motion is made, seconded, and carries unanimously to approve item number 6. Next item on the agenda is number 7.
This is Russell May with Asset Management. Staff is recommending that the School Land Board waive the PSF right to purchase the subject property as discussed in closed session. Anybody has any questions?
Scott Rorman moves to approve.
Todd, second.
Motion is made, seconded, and carries unanimously to approve item number 7. Next item on the agenda is number 8.
Morning, Ken Mills. Staff recommends that the board approve areas along the Texas coast for storage of carbon dioxide projects, and also authorize staff to issue one or more RFPs along the coast for such projects. As described in the memo to the board and as we discussed in the executive session, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Mills at this time?
Scott Rorman moves to approve.
This is Michael. I'll second.
A motion is made, seconded, and carries unanimously to approve item number 8. There being no further business before the board, the meeting is hereby adjourned.